Inside America's most extreme Supermax, the unseen psychological reality of ADX Florence. There are prisons built to punish, others built to contain, but ADX Florence was engineered for something far more unsettling: the ability to break a person without ever laying a hand on them. Inside these walls, silence isn't peaceful, it's weaponized. Routine isn't stability, it's control. And isolation isn't a punishment, it's the foundation of the entire institution. For years, officials have called ADX the place for inmates who can't be controlled anywhere else. But psychologists say that title hides a deeper, darker truth, one that reveals how the human mind reacts when stripped of every social reference point, every sound, every choice, every fragment of normal life. This documentary opens the door the system rarely lets anyone see, and once you step inside, the question becomes unavoidable. How long can a human mind survive in a world built to erase everything that makes someone human? This documentary is created strictly for educational and informational purposes. All scenes, narration, and descriptions are presented in a responsible and respectful manner. No graphic content or harmful behavior is shown or encouraged. This video complies with YouTube's community guidelines, and all sensitive topics discussed are handled with care and neutrality. Viewer discretion is advised due to the real-life nature of prison environments. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd really love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime documentaries like this, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who would enjoy it too. Your support helps us keep bringing powerful stories to life. ADX Florence wasn't built during a wave of riots, nor in response to a single catastrophic event. It was built because the federal system realized that controlling behavior wasn't enough. They needed a facility capable of controlling environment, stimulus, and ultimately the mind. Located in the remote Colorado desert, far from city noise and courtroom crowds, the Supermax sits like a psychological fortress. Every hallway, sensor, lock, and routine has one purpose: to eliminate unpredictability, to leave no room for impulse, to compress the human experience into something measurable, containable, and constantly monitored. Officials describe ADX as a clean, controlled, necessary evolution of high-security incarceration. But former inmates, legal experts, and psychologists see something different, a place where the line between safety and psychological erosion grows dangerously thin. This documentary doesn't seek shock value. It seeks truth. How does a place engineered for total control reshape the thinking, emotions, and survival instincts of the people living inside it? And more importantly, what does that reveal about the system that built it? The architecture of control. Long before an inmate enters ADX Florence, the prison has already begun shaping their behavior. Its design is not accidental. It's psychological engineering laid out in concrete, steel, and silence. Every cell is positioned at an angle that prevents inmates from seeing one another. Doors open not to hallways of movement, but to short, narrow corridors designed to restrict sound and limit any sense of shared space. Even the recreation yards, small, cage-like enclosures, are built to keep inmates from seeing the sky in its full openness. Criminologists and psychologists who have studied Supermax environments describe them with a consistent theme. Predictability replaces freedom, and routine replaces identity. In ADX, this principle is amplified. Every meal, every shower, every movement follows a timetable that never changes. Not out of efficiency, but control. Former inmates, interviewed by legal investigators, said the environment creates a quiet pressure on the mind. Not through overt punishment, but through the absence of stimulation. One described it as living in a world where nothing responds to you. Not people, not sound, not time. Rosa motion sensors track steps. Automated doors eliminate human contact. Even the rare moments when an inmate hears another voice, it's muffled by layers of concrete. In this system, unpredictability becomes a rarity. And when unpredictability disappears, something else slowly fades with it. the part of the mind that relies on social cues, interaction, and spontaneous decision-making. Experts from the American Psychological Association warn that long-term exposure to this kind of environment can erode cognitive flexibility, the mental ability to adapt, interpret, and respond to change. Inside ADX, the architecture itself becomes a constant reminder that every choice has already been made for you. This chapter sets the stage for a deeper question. If the building is designed to limit movement, sound, and emotion, what happens to the people who must live inside it for years? The mind under extreme isolation. Inside ADX Florence, isolation is not an occasional disciplinary measure. It is the foundation of daily life. Inmates spend up to 22 to 24 hours alone, surrounded by concrete on every side. Experts describe this as a form of social starvation, where the brain receives none of the feedback it normally depends on to stay balanced. Psychologists who study long-term solitude explain that the human mind is wired for interaction. Even small exchanges, eye contact, overheard conversations, gestures, act as stabilizers. When those stabilizers disappear, the mind begins searching for stimuli that no longer exist. Former inmates interviewed in legal filings described this shift quietly but powerfully. One said the silence felt so thick it presses against your thoughts, while another described the days as a loop with no edges. You don't know where you are in time. Research cited by the National Institute of Justice shows that long-term isolation disrupts the brain's emotional regulation systems. The amygdala becomes more reactive. The prefrontal cortex, which handles reasoning and impulse control, becomes less active. The result is a psychological environment where stress reactions increase even when external threats are minimal. Yet the most striking change happens in perception. Without regular human contact, inmates begin to lose the subtle sense of themselves that comes from reflection in others. For some, this leads to withdrawal and numbness. For others, frustration builds because there is no natural outlet, no conversation, no debate, no chance to gauge a reaction. A mental health expert who toured the facility for a federal review described it in simple terms. The environment doesn't give the mind anything to hold on to. That absence becomes its own form of pressure, slowly reshaping how inmates think, feel, and respond to the world. This chapter raises a critical issue. In a place where isolation is the norm, how does the psyche adapt when the only constant presence is the self? When routine replaces identity. For most people, identity is shaped by choices. What time you wake up, what you eat, where you go, who you speak to, what you think about during the day. Inside ADX Florence, those choices disappear, and with them, the anchors that normally define a person. Every day unfolds with the same precise rhythm. Meals arrive through a slot. The lights follow a set schedule. Movement is pre-approved, escorted, and monitored. Even recreation, meant to offer relief, becomes part of a rigid pattern. There is no variation, no decision-making, no moment where an inmate influences the outcome of their day. Psychological researchers, including Craig Haney, warn that when routine becomes absolute, the mind begins to detach from self-directed action. Instead of choosing, the brain learns to wait. Instead of anticipating something different, it adapts to predict nothing at all. Former inmates who have spoken through legal affidavits describe this shift in subtle but alarming ways. One said that after months of identical days, you stop feeling like a person who lives a life. You start feeling like a person who watches time happen to you. Another noted that the absence of decision-making made it difficult to think creatively or problem-solve, even on simple tasks. Inside ADX, routine doesn't only manage behavior. It gradually reshapes how inmates interpret themselves. When every hour is controlled, self-identity becomes tied not to personal values or experiences, but to the structure imposed by the institution. This is why experts argue that extreme routine doesn't merely restrict freedom. It redefines the internal sense of agency. The capacity to initiate action, a key component of psychological well-being, begins to weaken. This chapter leaves a crucial question lingering. If identity fades under routine, what kind of person emerges when habit becomes the only form of existence? The behavioral tension point. Inside ADX Florence, behavior doesn't simply reflect personality. It becomes a negotiation between pressure, environment, and a shrinking space where personal will still exist. In a place engineered to eliminate conflict through total separation, tension doesn't disappear, it redirects inward. Criminologists describe this as the behavioral tension point, a psychological stage where the mind oscillates between coping strategies and the strain of prolonged confinement. With no social environment to respond to, inmates develop internal routines, pacing in measured steps, repeating quiet phrases, reorganizing small items, or mentally replaying memories. These behaviors aren't signs of instability, they're survival mechanisms. Experts from the American Psychological Association emphasize that when people lose external structure, they often create microstructures to stay grounded. But in ADX, where structure is absolute and imposed, the mind creates these internal behaviors not out of freedom, but out of necessity. They become the only area where personal control can still exist. Former inmates, speaking through court records and psychological evaluations, describe habits that formed without conscious intent. One said he found himself counting the screws in the vent every morning because it was the only thing that didn't change. Another described building stories in his mind just to feel time move forward. What makes the ADX environment unique is that these coping methods develop in isolation, without feedback, without adjustment, without the subtle corrections that come from daily human interaction. That means behaviors can solidify, intensify, or drift in directions the individual never intended. Legal reviewers who studied the facility noted that this internal tension often becomes the quiet foundation of an inmate's emotional life. The struggle isn't loud or visible. It's the slow friction between maintaining control and feeling it slip away day after day in silence. This chapter leads to a larger question. When a person's only outlet for emotion is their own mind, what happens when that mind starts pushing back? The quiet collision between memory and reality. As the months stretch into years, the greatest psychological battle inside ADX Florence doesn't come from isolation itself, but from the collision between an inmate's internal world and the environment that refuses to change. Human memory thrives on contrast. New places, new interactions, shifting emotions, unexpected experiences. These differences help the brain create timelines, organize meaning, and reinforce identity. Inside ADX, those anchors disappear. Without variation, memories begin blending together, forming what psychologists call compressed time, a feeling that days dissolve into each other without distinct edges. Experts such as Dr. Craig Haney warn that when memory loses variety, the mind compensates by relying more heavily on internal imagery. Former inmates have described this shift vividly in legal testimony, imagining past neighborhoods so clearly it feels like they're standing in them, replaying conversations word for word, reconstructing entire days from earlier chapters of their lives simply to feel a change of scenery. But this mental escape comes with consequences. The more detailed the internal world becomes, the more distant the external one feels. In extreme isolation, the mind begins to treat its own memories as a form of substitute reality. Psychologists describe it as a subtle drift, not delusion, but a reshaping of mental focus where the past becomes more emotionally vivid than the present. One former inmate said he would walk through childhood streets in my head because it was the only place where life moved. Another described remembering the sound of traffic so clearly that it felt louder than the silence of the cell. This mental shift isn't dramatic, it's gradual. But over time, it widens the space between who an inmate once was and who they are becoming inside ADX. The environment remains static, but the mind does not. And when those two realities no longer align, emotional strain deepens. This chapter leaves a pressing question lingering in the quiet. If memory becomes the only place where life still feels real, How long can a person hold on to the present before it slips away completely? The emotional pressure of a life without feedback. Emotions are meant to move, to be expressed, interpreted, adjusted, and softened through interaction. Inside ADX Florence, there is no such movement. Feelings build in one direction because nothing pushes back, nothing absorbs them, nothing reflects them. The result is an emotional environment unlike any other in the American prison system. Mental health researchers note that emotional regulation depends heavily on external cues, a look, a tone of voice, a gesture, even a disagreement. These cues help people recognize when they're calm, stressed, frustrated, or slipping into anger. But in ADX, where inmates often go days without seeing a face, emotions form in a vacuum. Former inmates have described this vividly in sworn statements. One said that anger doesn't spike, it stretches, slowly expanding without confrontation or resolution. Another described sadness as a quiet weight that doesn't leave because nothing interrupts it. Without human friction, emotional states become continuous, sometimes lasting far longer than they would in a social environment. Psychologists warn that this magnification effect can lead to internal conflict. A small irritation might linger for days because there is no interaction to diffuse it. A moment of anxiety can develop into an overwhelming sense of dread simply because nothing shifts the emotional landscape. Over time, inmates begin relying on self-created strategies to manage their emotional world. Some talk to themselves. Others develop highly structured routines. A few try to detach completely, numbing their feelings to avoid being overwhelmed. These adjustments aren't signs of weakness. They're the mind's attempt to create balance in a place where natural emotional rhythms no longer exist. A federal mental health reviewer described it best. In ADX, feelings don't flare up, they settle in. And in a place where emotions have nowhere to go, they can quietly become one of the most powerful forces shaping an inmate's daily life. This chapter raises a critical question. If emotions never dissipate naturally, how does a person keep them from taking control in a world that offers no relief? The shift in social instincts. Human beings are social creatures by design. Even people who prefer solitude still rely on subtle social instincts. The ability to read a face, sense intent, interpret tone, and predict how others might respond. Inside ADX Florence, those instincts begin to fade, not because inmates lose interest, but because the environment gives them nothing to work with. Psychologists studying extreme isolation explain that social intuition is like a muscle. When it goes unused, it weakens. Without regular interaction, the mind becomes less practiced at anticipating social cues and more cautious about interpreting them. Over time, this can create what experts call social disorientation, the sense that other people feel distant, unpredictable, or difficult to understand. Former inmates who later re-entered environments with even minimal social contact often reported feeling overwhelmed. One described hearing multiple voices in a hallway as too much information at once. Another said eye contact felt intrusive because he had gone years without anyone looking directly at him. These accounts don't indicate fear. They reflect how the brain adapts to an environment where social complexity no longer exists. Legal reviews of ADX noted that the prison's design amplifies this shift. Because inmates rarely see faces, human expressions lose immediacy. Because they rarely hear conversation, tone loses meaning. Because interactions are brief, structured, and monitored, spontaneity disappears altogether. The result is a gradual retraining of social instincts. Instead of assessing people, the mind begins assessing walls, routines, and patterns. Instead of anticipating conversation, it anticipates silence. Social behaviors become less intuitive and more mechanical. Criminologists warn that this internal shift can make reintegration, even into general population units, difficult. When instinctive skills fade, simple interactions can feel foreign, and harmless misunderstandings can feel threatening. This chapter leaves a profound question hanging. If the environment teaches the mind to expect silence instead of people, what happens when a human being is finally forced to step back into a world that speaks? Reflection, survival, and the human spirit. ADX Florence is a place of extremes. Its walls, routines, and isolation are engineered not just to contain, but to transform. And yet, amid the silence and unyielding structure, the human mind finds ways to endure. Survival here isn't measured in strength or aggression. It's measured in mental endurance, emotional adaptation, and the creation of inner routines that preserve a sense of self. Former inmates describe it as a balancing act, holding on to fragments of identity while adapting to an environment that systematically removes them. Psychologists emphasize that the mind's resilience is remarkable. Even under extreme sensory and social deprivation, people find methods to cope. Internal storytelling, memory reconstruction, imagined social interactions, and the maintenance of rigid personal routines. These strategies reflect both the fragility and the tenacity of the human psyche. Yet ADX Florence also serves as a stark mirror to society. It exposes the tension between safety, justice, and human rights. The same systems designed to prevent violence can inadvertently create psychological pressure that lingers long after the cells are left behind. The stories of those who endure its walls are not tales of heroism, nor of villainy. They are complex portraits of survival under conditions few can imagine. As we close this exploration, one thing is undeniable. The environment shapes the mind as powerfully as any person or circumstance. And in ADX Florence, that shaping occurs in silence, in solitude, and in the quiet negotiation between survival and identity. If this journey into the deepest corners of the federal prison system fascinated you, hit like, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for more documentaries that uncover the psychological realities behind America's most extreme institutions. The mind is resilient, the stories are real, and the truth deserves to be seen. Thank you for watching.